Hello again. This is just a quick video to talk about political organization, which you guys are reading about this week. I don't want to make this one particularly long. You guys are going to read most of the things that are like really critically important here. And so I just want to kind of touch on a couple of things, right? One of the things to understand about the anthropological approach to political organization and politics is that it's not like a lot of political sciences in terms of like worrying about political party. We don't really care about that at all. The anthropological approach to politics is trying to understand who has power, less about who has power and more how they gain power and how it's legitimized. And by legitimized, I just mean, how is it that we decide this person is the one in control? That, every election, it seems like half of the people are really happy with the choice and half of the people are really not. But all of us then follow the rules of that individual, right? Whether it be the mayor or the governor or the president or the Congress or the Supreme Court or the whatever it is, right? Supreme Court's not elected, but you know what I mean. When individuals come into power in a society, in our own or in others, how is it that we decide, yes, I'm going to follow this individual. I'm going to accept their right to govern me. I'm going to accept their authority over me, right? So for anthropologists, we're interested in that. To us, Democrats, Republicans, independents, libertarians, they're the same thing. As far as we're concerned, obviously they're not ideologically, but as far as we're concerned, they're the same thing because they gain power through the same mechanism, right? How is that mechanism play out in a society, right? That's in many ways what we're interested in, right? We're also interested in some different things. One is power. Three things here that we're interested in really is power, authority, and influence when it comes to politics. Power I'll go into in just a minute, but basically power is coercive power, the ability to compel you to do something, right? The gentleman on the screen right there is the president of the United States, Donald Trump. And you might love him, you might hate him, you might be totally indifferent about him. But if he signs a law, then you have to follow it. Love it, hate it, whatever. It doesn't actually matter. He has the ability to compel you to do something. If he instituted a draft tomorrow, and you got called up, that's it. And you can say, well, I wouldn't go. Cool, then you go to jail, right? They can compel you, right? They can force you to do what they want, right? That's power, right? Authority is a little bit different. They can't compel you to do something, right? Authority, political authority in some ways, is basically where someone is seen as such an expert in one particular area that their words hold profound sway. And a good example of this is the gentleman that I have there, who is Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett is a stock market billionaire. He is at his peak. He's retired now, but at his kind of prime, he was worth $80 billion. Warren Buffett is seen as such a guru of the stock market, is seen as such a master of trading and everything else, corporations and corporate valuation, that if he says something, then people listen. If he says, I think that company over there is really, really good, their stock price will double the minute he says that, because he's seen as such an authority about the stock market. But I have no idea what he thinks about, I don't know, religious doctrine, right? I have no idea what he thinks about climate change. I have no idea what he thinks about anything beyond the stock market, because he is seen as an expert. He's extremely well respected. He's always listened to, but only in that one arena. Influence is a little bit different. Influence is where an individual is seen as having intelligence in more than one arena, unlike authority, where you have one arena, influence kind of goes across it. And a great example of this is Dr. King, that he was seen as such a moral individual. He was seen as such a good person, that whatever he said about the economy or civil rights or religion or politics or whatever else, people listened. Another example of this might be Mahatma Gandhi. right? The Mahatma was, seen in much the same way that whatever he said, people kind of listened to, right? And so these are three of the different kind of arenas that we examine how people come to positions of height, within a culture, right? So really quick, you guys have been reading about this. Two of the basic organizing principles when we talk about political organization is state and non-state. And when we say state, we don't mean like the state of Florida, right? We mean like the body politic. Like a nation state is a term that you're probably familiar with. The big thing about a state is that they have coercive power, and coercive power just means that they have the ability to force you to do something, right? They have centralized political authority, right? And because they have the ability to make you do something, it means that they have to have something to compel you, which is standing armies and police, what Marvin Harris called paramilitary forces, right? You have to be able to force people into doing what you want, right? These tend to be very hierarchical, and the important thing to understand about states is that they grant rights. I often point this out, and I have to some of my classes, I think, this semester already, but we have this really odd notion in the West, particularly in the United States, about inalienable rights. You have no inalienable rights. There is literally no right that you have that the government can't take away, right? You have the right to free speech. Yeah, you can't go into an airport and start talking about bombs. See how far your right to free speech carries you. The Second Amendment, you have the right to own guns, unless you get convicted of a felony, and then we're like, no, you don't have that right anymore. You literally, even your right to live, the state can take away. If you do something bad enough, right now in our culture, that would be murder or treason, will take away your life, right? You don't have any right that the state cannot take away 100% of the time. The reality is the kind of most freedom that you see is in a non-state system. A non-state system existed before the rise of agriculture, which we talked a little bit about, and state level societies. During 99% of our history as foragers, we lived in a non-state system, right? There was no coercive power. There's only influence, right? You had complete individual autonomy. You had more or less, social equality. I say more or less because some individuals were just seen as being more experienced in something, right? And so as foragers, as hunter-gatherers, we're going to live out in, natural areas. And if somebody that's older, wiser, and better experienced, like, look, I think we need to move camp because there's not enough food here, we're probably going to listen to that person more so than we're going to listen to somebody that doesn't have that experience, right? So the question about this is, why did we ever give this up? And in truth, I wanted to mention this most of all because you guys are reading about this. We didn't choose to give this up, right? It happened naturally. When we started to settle into communities, when we settled into villages, when we started farming, we needed somebody that had power. We needed somebody to force individuals to play nice, right? Because we were stuck with each other. Those are my crops over there, and you and I have to get along because your crops are next to my crops, and we're competing for the same resources, and we're doing the same thing. And we can't just up and move because we have a growing season, and my food won't be ready in that field for another 3 months. And so we need to get along, right? And we need somebody to organize our labor. We need somebody to put things together like we talked about with archaeology. We need somebody to help us build the irrigation trench. We need somebody to help us prepare the fields. And so it's important that we like each other, or if not like each other, at least don't murder each other. And so it's not that we ever really gave this up. It's that we recognize the necessity of it. And there is a necessity to it, right? So how is political authority organized? We break these down into a couple of different groups. In a non-state system, we have what's called a band, where there's no formal leader associated with forager societies, right? You usually see 20 to 100 people in there, give or take, right? They can be a little bit bigger, but extremely rarely. Honestly, they almost never hit even 100. 20 to 50 is more likely. This is a small group of individuals. They're always nomadic, right? They're always moving around, that kind of thing. Next up, you have a tribe. And this is why when people use the word tribe, it means something very specific to us. It's not a generic term for like a pre-industrial society. A tribe is when several bands sort of come together. This is almost always with horticultural or pastoral societies. You can get hundreds up to a few thousand. You also see a political leader named a headman at this point, where is an individual that does not have political power, again, in the way that I defined power earlier as coercive power. This is an individual that has influence, really, influence and authority. And so it's just someone that's so well respected that they're listened to, right? Beyond that is a chiefdom. And there's a little bit of a debate in anthropology about whether or not chiefdoms even exist. I know that sounds weird because you've heard of people called chiefs. Realistically, in the historic record, most of the times that you hear someone called a chief, they're actually a king. This was done for complex historic reasons, but the simplified version is this. When colonialism started and Europeans began to conquer other regions and peoples, they believed in a thing called the divine right of kings. Kings ruled because God wanted them to rule, and that's how they kind of justified being jacked up rich and lording it over everybody, right? And so one of the things that we see is that because of this, they had a weird thing of kings were rivals, but they also had to respect each other. They couldn't sort of encourage the killing of other kings because the idea of killing your king and overthrowing them might take hold back home. And so whenever they encountered sort of kings in Africa or in Southeast Asia or in the Americas, they go, oh, he's a chief, right? Well, the description of a chief is usually exactly the same thing as the description of a king. It's multiple villages or multiple townships that are organized under one person, a chief, which is, politically and socially complex. And a lot of times they'd say, oh, well, this chief is chief because his daddy was chief before him. Yeah, that's a king. But they didn't want to admit that, right? And so we debate whether or not there's actually even a difference between a kingdom and a chiefdom. Personally, I've never run across an example of a chiefdom that I don't think would be better described as a kingdom, right? And then at that point, you get into state level political organization, which is kingdoms, city states, nation states, all of that kind of stuff, right? So one of the things that's important here too is about, it's really about control. Is what all of political organization is about, right? In small scale societies like a band where there's 20, 30 people, right? Life is just much more personal. It's one-on-one, and you can sort of have social control through easier mechanisms, right? Through talking to people, talking about people, through social pressure. Think about your friend group, right? It's about sort of, harmony, right? It's about maintaining an equilibrium, right? With these small scale societies. With larger scale societies, there becomes less face-to-face accountability. There becomes less ability to kind of deal with things on a personal level. And so this is where you see legal systems, right? You see laws rather than norms. In small scale society, you find norms. In large scale society, you find laws, right? Because you need a sort of stronger mandate, right? And in larger scale societies, it almost always takes laws almost always take the form of the lack or loss of access to resources and redistribution. So you speed, we take away some of your resources, we call that money. You screw up bad enough, we lock you in jail and you can't earn anymore, right? Things like that, right? So all of this is really just about sort of social control. And even with legal systems, we have this fiction that legal systems is about justice. No, it's not. The idea of justice is the idea that of payback, of balance, of returning things to normal. If somebody kills a loved one, there you can lock them in jail. That doesn't bring your loved one back. It's not about, sort of balancing the scales. It's about equilibrium. It's about maintaining social harmony. It's about maintaining control. It has nothing to do with justice, right? That's a fiction that we've created, and so all of this though is about that. Okay, and so as you read through this chapter on political organization, just give some of that a thought. Thank you guys very much, and we'll talk soon.